I am very excited today for numerous different reasons, and I will let when Tiffany talks about the legislative update. I mean, wow, what a week at the North Carolina General Assembly, and we are super excited about some of the possibilities that hopefully lie ahead there. But prior to getting to that, we wanted to have Steve Mange is our guest speaker today, and Steve is the Senior Policy Counsel and the interim legislative counsel for our North Carolina Department of Justice. And Steve has really been a leader along with advocates, parents, all kinds of folks, many of you on this call across the state, trying to get a handle on the opioid crisis in North Carolina, turn things around for the better, hold corporations and others accountable around what's happened in North Carolina. And he really does an amazing job. He and I met a few years back talking about the issue of Medicaid expansion. So Steve is going to talk to us about the opioid settlement, which some of you may know something about, but Steve's going to kind of talk in depth about what's going on with that and what some opportunities might be related to that. Then, of course, our policy director, the one and only Tiffany Gladney, will be providing a legislative update from this past week. And then Fawn is going to also talk about some changes we're going to make to these legislative updates moving forward. So again, I encourage you to ask any questions. Steve's going to do his presentation and we'll have a little time for Q&A after that. And now I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that kind introduction, and I'm really happy to be here today. Appreciate the work that all of you do on behalf of children and families all over the state. Let me first see if I can manage to share my screen. I do have a PowerPoint for my kind of introductory overview. So let's give this a shot here. All right, I hope everybody sees the same slide that I see right now, getting the thumbs up. So again, I work at the Department of Justice for Attorney General Josh Stein and his team. I'm going to talk about the opioid settlements today. And let's see here. I'm going to kind of take a funnel approach. I'm going to give you a very broad overview of what I'm talking about here when I talk about the opioid litigation and the opioid settlements at the national level, talk about what's happening right now in North Carolina, and then try to leave a few minutes for y'all to ask whatever questions that you may have. So nationally, I think most of you are aware that there has been litigation against different companies involved in making or distributing opioids like OxyContin and Vicodin and drugs like that. The plaintiffs in these cases, that is the people who are bringing the lawsuits, have primarily been states as well as counties and municipalities. There are some other plaintiffs, but the vast overwhelming majority are state and local governments. This is a bit of a busy slide for you, but I did want to just give you an idea of the defendants in these cases, that is the companies that have been sued for their behavior relating to opioids. And if you look at that very top row, what you see is there's manufacturers like Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin. There's distributors. These are these large Fortune 100 companies that get drugs from manufacturers and distribute them to the hundreds of thousands of pharmacies all over the country. And then there's the pharmacy chains themselves, like CVS, Walgreens. And then there's also a company called McKinsey that provided consulting services to Purdue Pharma. So that's the different groups of defendants. So now I'm going to talk about the second column here, just to point out that some of these companies have been so overwhelmed by the litigation that they have filed for bankruptcy. And in particular, Purdue Pharma, they're kind of the Darth Vader of this story, the company that aggressively marketed OxyContin and helped fuel the opioid epidemic. They are in bankruptcy proceedings in New York, and that's kind of its own separate litigation. This third row here that says settlements, this is really what I'm going to talk about today. There's been a big settlement with 4 companies that are in red type here, and that is the 3 drug distributors, Cardinal, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen, along with the drug maker Johnson & Johnson. That's the company, you know, that makes baby powder and Q-tips and things we're all familiar with. But they have a subsidiary, Janssen, that is one of the opioid makers. And then this last row is just to point out that this litigation is not over. There's ongoing litigation against additional manufacturers as well as the big pharmacy chains. And so it's a pretty complicated landscape out there. But what I'm talking about is this settlement with these 4 companies in red. And what the settlement provides, and by the way, this, you know, there were a lot of folks involved in this, but my boss, Attorney General Josh Stein, was very involved in the leadership at the national level that led to this $26 billion settlement to be paid out over 18 years. The amount that North Carolina gets is a little more than $750 million, again, spread out over 18 years, with some of that money kind of front loaded in the first few years. And just to mention that as part of the settlement, a lot of these companies have agreed to stop doing the bad behavior that they were engaged in that helped fuel the opioid epidemic. So now I'm going to talk about what does this mean for North Carolina? How is this $750 million coming to North Carolina? How is it getting allocated? What is it being used for? Are we going to really have an idea at the end of the day how the money was used and what impact it had? And that's what I mean by transparency and accountability. So first, very high level, overall allocations of this $750 million, 15% of it will come to the state of North Carolina, and that means that the General Assembly will decide how to spend the money, and 85% of it will go to local governments, and by local governments, I mean all 100 counties plus 17 municipalities. And all of that is part of a memorandum. All of that is sort of set forth in a memorandum of agreement, or MOA, that has been agreed to by the state and local governments in North Carolina. There, as part of this MOA that I mentioned, there's some guardrails about how the funds can be used. And it's a little bit complicated, but at a very high level, when you're talking about how local governments in particular can use the money, there's something called Option A and Option B. And Option A is a shorter list of really high impact strategies. These are strategies that have been proven very effective in addressing the opioid epidemic. These are things like evidence-based treatment, particularly treatment with the medications methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone. You sometimes hear medication-assisted treatment. That is something that works very well for opioid addiction. Also, recovery support, harm reduction strategies like distributing naloxone, that's the overdose reversal drug, and other types of strategies that the Department of Health and Human Services and other experts helped us identify. Option B is a little trickier. Option B involves a local government going through a collaborative strategic planning process that's kind of outlined in the memorandum of agreement. And one of the things they get, in addition to the benefits of really thoughtful planning and stakeholder engagement, is it opens up a wider array of strategies from them to choose from. And so believe me, I could spend the rest of the day talking about how Option A works and Option B works. I'll tell you later that I actually drafted a 30-page FAQ on this topic that I'm going to point you to in case you're as fascinated as I am. But this is the broad brush overview of how local governments are able to use the opioid settlement money. One of the things we're really proud of in North Carolina is the very, very high level of transparency and accountability that local governments in particular will have for how they use the money. They have to set up special revenue funds that are subject to audit. They have to submit annual financial and impact reports about how they're using the opioid settlement money and what kind of impact that's having. And all of this is available to you, to advocates, to the public, to public officials, to journalists, academics, and ordinary residents of North Carolina. And I'll show you how and where that information is going to be made available. The website that I would love for you all to visit when you have time it's ncopioidsettlement.org. It's already up and running. We are the first state in the country to have something like this up and running. And it is really an amazing resource. We have decided to call it Community Opioid Resources Engine for North Carolina, or Core NC. But take a look at ncopioidsettlement.org. It was developed with a huge partnership of us, the Department of Health and Human Services, the county commissioners, the League of Municipalities, and the UNC Injury Prevention Research Center with seed money from the Duke Energy Foundation. You will find at this website lots of information to ensure transparency and accountability, a lot of tools, resources, and data to help local governments. We're developing portals where local governments will be reporting data, and lots of dashboards to inform you, policymakers, members of the public, advocates, about how the money is being used. And one thing I want to particularly point you to on this website is these dashboards. So there's county-specific data. So you can go to your county and you can pull up opioid indicators, overdose deaths, emergency department visits, things like that. You can pull up community drivers of health, like homelessness and suicide rates, and what many of us would call social determinants of health, but we thought that was a little too technocratic. So we called it community drivers of health. And then one thing that really has garnered the most attention is you can go county by county and city by city, and you can see exactly how much money different counties and municipalities are getting in these settlement payment schedules. So please visit this resource to learn more. And one other thing, by the way, if you visit this resource, one of the things that's on there, as I mentioned, is some really detailed FAQs about both the memorandum of agreement I talked about, as well as some of those high impact strategies. And so take advantage of that information. A lot of the questions that I get now, I'm really glad that we put those FAQs together, because we're often able to say, that is an excellent question. See FAQ question 37, which gives you an answer to your question. So check that out if this is an area that you're interested in learning more about. Many of you I know are advocates for children and families. Many of you are interested, your ears perk up when you hear about money coming to local governments to take on an issue like this. And I just wanted to share a few thoughts. We get a lot of questions about, well, what's the best way for me to get involved at the local level? And when I have talked to county commissioners, county managers, the Association of County Commissioners, a few things seem to come up over and over again as far as sort of tips and tricks for getting involved at the local level. The first one is it really pays to understand the information I've shared with you today, to understand the mechanics of how much money is your county getting, how can they spend the money. So get the facts. I know that's a habit that all of you have as effective advocates. The second bullet here is really important. I think that many local officials, they're overwhelmed, underpaid, understaffed, they're busy, they have to be knowledgeable about a million different subjects. What they don't want is 30 different advocates coming to them separately to say how the opioid settlement money should be spent, they will just sort of tune out. And it's a much better approach to try to figure out, if you have a local coalition or task force that is looking at the best use of the money, get involved in those conversations and do your best. It's hard. I know it's hard, but do your best at the local level to sort of try to build a consensus around really the best use of the opioid settlement money. And there is some information, I think that there's some information on the on Core NC about how to find your like local groups that are involved in these conversations. And again, I think for many of you, this might be obvious, but for a lot of folks, it's not. You want to figure out who at the local level, which official is probably the key person to talk to. And many of you may be aware of this, but often when you look at these overworked, underpaid county boards or city councils, there tends to be some specialization. So you might want to look at figuring out, well, who's the county board member that really specializes in health and human services? Some of you may know this already from the work that you do, but a good place to check is which county official sits on the board of the LMEMCO that deals with behavioral health issues day in and day out. That's probably the person you want to talk to, not the other county board member who really focuses on like utility and water management issues. And the last point here that, and again, you all know this better than I do, but when you do get to the right official, you don't necessarily want to march in with a bunch of charts and graphs and white papers and reams of studies and data and so on. You really want to lead with your personal story, why you're passionate about this work. A lot of people have, unfortunately, very tough stories to tell about the opioid epidemic and how it's impacted their families or their communities or their faith communities. And so you really want to lead with those kind of stories and that kind of passion before you get into the nitty gritty. And so I just want to end with this before I open it up for any questions you might have. I will again share that website, ncopioidsettlement.org. There's a lot of legalistic information on the DOJ opioid webpage, which is called More Powerful NC. If you go to More Powerful NC and click opioid settlements, a lot of kind of overviews of the national litigation and the MOA. And then please feel free to shoot me an email, smange@ncdoj.gov, if you have any questions that don't get answered or that you don't want to ask in this public forum. So those are my prepared remarks. I think we still have maybe 7 or 8 minutes for questions. So let me see if I can unshare my screen. There we go. So I look forward to hearing any questions or comments that folks might have.
Steve, thank you so much. That was very helpful. I mean, I just love the overview, knowing about the website, which seems like a wonderful resource. And a lot of those advocacy tips you talked about, I mean, thank you for those. Those are very similar to some of the basic advocacy tips we talk about, which are very important. We have, there are other local processes that advocates are interested in too, like local ARPA money, et cetera. But I think that the things you're talking about were really helpful. So Steve has been generous, and he's got a hard stop at 11:30 here. So I've got a question, but I wanted to let folks chime in here if anybody has a question they want to ask.
In the chat, the question about have the funds been distributed and is there a timeline for spending? Great question, Jenna. Let me answer those separately. So that is the most timely question ever, because the first set of payments actually went out this week. So the state of North Carolina got $4.4 million. There was actually a sort of a bureaucratic process that local governments needed to go through. They needed to provide, their bank account information to the National Settlement Administrator. So as of this week, I think 65 of the 100, and it's actually 114 local governments. So about half the local governments have received wire transfers of their first payments. The other half, it's coming soon. It'll probably be a couple of weeks from now, once they've got all their paperwork in. But just keep in mind, it's an 18-year settlement. And so you want to go to the website and you want to go to the dashboard and you want to click on that payout schedule dashboard to see how much money over those 18 years your local government is getting. And as far as the use of the funds, this is something we really thought long and hard about. On the one hand, we don't want the money to just sit there forever. On the other hand, I think you all are familiar with these scenarios where, money goes out in, April, and it's like, oh, by the way, you have to spend this by the end of the fiscal year. And you're like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. And so where we landed on that is that local governments are not required to spend the money, for example, in the fiscal year that they receive the money. They can roll the money over really as long as they want. And what we are hoping is, kind of given the immediacy of this crisis and the transparency that we've provided, we're kind of assuming that the public opinion will put some urgency on local governments to make use of this money, but we also don't want them to rush to not consult stakeholders, to not engage in planning because they're in such a rush to spend the money. So I hope those are both excellent questions, and I hope that information is helpful. Thanks, Jenna.
Do we have any other questions? I have time for one or two more.
I will chime in since you mentioned the ARPA money, and you all know there's just massive amount of ARPA money coming in. It actually dwarfs the amount of money coming from the opioid settlement. And one of the reasons that we really encourage local governments to take their time and engage in planning is to really think about how to braid these different funding streams. There's some overlap between what opioid settlement funds can be used for and what ARPA funds can be used for, especially when you talk about like recovery housing or employment services to support people in recovery. Well, it turns out some of that stuff you can also use ARPA money for. And so you really want to encourage local governments to get a lot of stakeholder input and to really engage in truly thoughtful planning about not just the opioid money, but how does the opioid money relate to some of these other pots of money?
That's a great point as well, Steve. And the one thing I just wanted to, as obviously folks on this webinar here are very interested in the well-being of children, and their families. And I think we've all seen increased pressure on the foster care system, much of which is due related to the opioid crisis. So I think that in particular is certainly something that we're all interested in, maybe seeing this money going towards, mitigation and the big picture there of keeping families together. I just wonder if you have any comments on that.
Sure, a couple things. I mean, in the broadest sense, the point you just made, I think, is the key, which is that substance misuse, behavioral health problems, these are huge. You all know, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. I mean, you all know these are just huge underlying causes of, family dysfunction, kids going into foster care, parents, going to jail, for better or for worse. Not that's not always where they should be going for the kinds of issues they have, but unfortunately, that's the world that we live in, and that is often, of course, a huge challenge for the children of those parents. And so, in the broadest sense, anything that we can do to help folks get their lives back together and get them in treatment, get them in recovery, is ultimately going to benefit children and families, of course, in the broadest sense. One, I mentioned, I'll go back to option A and option B. Option A does include one of the sort of off-the-shelf strategies that local governments can pick is early intervention, including strategies. So sort of early intervention, is sort of strategies to help at-risk kids and young people that may be starting to struggle, showing signs of struggling with substance misuse. That is a readily available strategy. And then under that sort of option B, there's actually a very wide range of strategies that is a little bit broader. And, I don't have really time to get into that now, but they're both in the broadest sense of just helping people get better. But in some particular narrow strategies, I think there are opportunities to address, the issues that you all work on day in and day out.
Well, Steve, again, thank you so much for your wonderful work on this, and to Attorney General Stein, for being a part and really being a leader on this. We appreciate your time. We will be sharing out these resources with folks, and we hope we can call on you again in the future.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. I really admire the really difficult work that you all do day in and day out. I know you wouldn't do it if you weren't so passionate about the well-being of kids and families. And so please keep up the good work and let me know how I can help.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
All right. Take care.
All right. Now I am going to turn it over to our Policy Director, Tiffany Gladney, for our weekly legislative update.
Thanks, Adam, and happy Friday, y'all. So let's talk about what happened on Jones Street. This week was nothing short of historic, y'all. The Senate passed a Medicaid expansion bill for the first time ever in North Carolina. So we just want to say again, thank you so much to the Senate for passing this life-saving legislation, and we really hope that the House will follow suit. The Senate did also pass the controversial Parents' Bill of Rights and a medical marijuana bill this week. So I'll give you a second to let your head stop spinning, because mine is still spinning as well, because whoever thought we'd see the day. But let's talk a little bit about House Bill 149, the Medicaid expansion bill, whose official title is Expanding Access to Healthcare. So as I just stated, it successfully passed the Senate yesterday, June 2nd, and is now on its way to the House. Many are speculating, though, y'all, that the House will make significant changes to the bill if they even take it up for consideration. And just to refresh your memories a little bit, some notable highlights within the bill include expanding Medicaid for adults up to the 133% federal poverty level with a 5% buffer in that language. Work requirements are included in the bill as well, but they are severable, meaning that if the federal Medicaid officials or the courts reject the work requirements, the state's Medicaid expansion program would still stand. And should the federal government at any point stop covering 90% of the cost of the expansion population, or if the hospital assessments, which will be used to cover the remaining 10% of the cost, aren't sufficient, the state can rescind expansion. So we did also see House Bill 144 get resurrected this session and this week. So this legislation authorizes DHHS to issue a request for proposals for managed care entities to run the Children and Families Specialty Plan as an additional Medicaid managed care plan. This would represent a huge shift from the current county by county system of Medicaid plans for foster children to a single statewide specialty plan. The bill makes other changes to Medicaid managed care statutes and was originally a teledentistry bill that actually passed in the House in 2021. The Senate Health Committee transformed it this week and passed it, and it is now headed to the Senate Rules Committee. So on the early childhood education forefront, we saw another resurrection with House Bill 731. This bill passed the House in 2021 and was really focused on adult daycare facilities. However, the Senate altered the bill's contents to focus more on recruiting and retaining early childhood educators. In its current form, House Bill 731 will create additional pathways for individuals to earn a North Carolina early childhood credential via some community college courses. The bill was approved in the Senate Health Committee and has also been referred to Senate rules. And some other bills that I'm sure y'all have heard about and been talking about and we've been watching include House Bill 755, the Parents' Bill of Rights. This legislation creates a list of rights that truthfully parents mostly already have regarding their child's education, health, privacy, and safety. The bill places new requirements on public school employees to inform parents when students share information with them about physical and mental health, sexuality, and/or gender identity. The bill would prohibit education on topics related to sexuality and gender identity from kindergarten to third grade. The bill also mandates that healthcare practitioners obtain written parental consent before treating a child. This bill passed the Senate June 1st and is now in the House awaiting consideration and committee assignments. So that was a lot to take in, but I will turn it back over to you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. At this point in time, does anybody have any questions related to the legislative update?
Can I ask a quick question? Tiffany, you just talked about several different bills that started out in the House as one thing and then got totally transformed by the Senate into another thing. So what's the process now? Like those bills, when they go back to the House, the House can't do a whole lot to change them, right? Because they've already passed the House in a different form. So where do they go? They go to a joint committee now? Is that the deal?
Yeah, that's part of it. And then oftentimes with some of these, I'll coin the term Lazarus type bills, the original intent of the bill was added into another bill. So maybe with 731, for example, it was this adult daycare facilities bill initially, but maybe that got added to the 2021 budget as a line item. So the freestanding bill wasn't necessarily needed. So there's many different routes there that they take. And honestly, sometimes y'all, they just do what they want, to be completely honest.
It's true. I have a feeling we may see quite a bit of that in the next few weeks, that strange twist this legislation, different pieces may take. Any other questions? Well, Tiffany, I just want to thank you again for, being our eyes and ears down at the legislature this week, along with so many others. And with this Medicaid expansion bill, as you all know, this has been a huge priority for NC Child over many years, and many of you all. So we feel like it's an all hands on deck moment right now. We definitely are going to be calling upon folks, of like, hey, if this is the time that you can make that one phone call or get involved in this campaign through the month of June. Quite frankly, we're closer than we ever have been in providing health insurance coverage for hundreds of thousands of folks across the state of North Carolina. On a personal note, I just found it kind of ironic when the legislative debate was happening in the Senate, and there was just some amazing commentary on it from state senators that were standing up and just saying, like, look, I opposed this. I thought it was wrong for all these reasons. Now I think it's right for all of these reasons. I can't see why we wouldn't do this. And one senator, Kevin Corbin, who's a Republican from the western part of the state and has championed this issue for many years, he brought up the example of Sally, the single mom. And my mom's name is Sally and was a single mom who raised 2 children and who worked as a bank teller and worked at the Winn-Dixie on the weekends and didn't have health insurance. I mean, he is talking about real people's lives and how this will affect them. So we're committed to do whatever we can to try to help get this over the top, and I know you all are too. So let's celebrate and keep pushing forward. So if there are no other questions, I am going to share now or allow Fawn to share some ideas about how we're going to move forward with our legislative updates. Fawn.
Thanks, Adam. I'm a little choked up listening to you talk about your mom. This has been quite an emotional week and mostly really good. So thanks, everybody. And if you haven't called your senator yet to say thank you, please do that. And we'll all be talking to our House members about getting this over the finish line. Thank y'all for tuning in to this legislative update. We have some news. Y'all may have noticed if you've been attending these for a while that Zoom fatigue has really set in and our attendance numbers have gotten a lot lower. Thank you to those who took the survey we sent out last week. And I want to say thanks to Linda Staley and Kathy Bobbitt who took the survey and they won the $50 gift card. So thank you. Anyway, big changes coming. We are going to stop having live Friday meetings for the rest of this legislative session. What we're going to do instead is send you the usual email update, and it will still have video. So Tiffany is going to do just a legislative update. You'll get it in English and Spanish by email, written, and in video. If that's the way you prefer to watch it, we're still going to do that. So it's accessible. And you'll be getting those around this time every Friday for the rest of the legislative session. So no more live Zoom meetings. Once session is over, we will have, as we have done in the past, a live Zoom with a legislative session wrap up. So we will do that. We'll be able to have the conversation and answer questions and so forth. So in the meantime, if you have questions that you want Tiffany to answer or address in the legislative update, just shoot an email to Tiffany, to Adam, to me, anybody else on the NC Child team, and we'll get those to Tiffany so that she can address those in the update. So that's our plan going forward, and just really want to thank you all. I think taking a little break from Zoom will probably do us all some good, and then we'll regroup and see what we need to do for the long session. So thank you, everybody, very much.
Thank you very much, Fawn. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk soon.